Oh, hey guys, how you doing? Guess you heard about the zombie apocalypse that started last night, huh? Yeah, it's a tough break for us, and that's why I'm broadcasting down here from my basement. Also, why I got this trusty little helper, you know, in case any of them come down into the basement. And I think there might have been some upstairs earlier, so I'm going to try not to make too much noise. But, you know, I thought I'd still talk about Mozi today because if anyone can use the words of Mozi and the ideas of universal love and impartial caring, it's a world in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. So I guess I should put this down for the moment. Don't worry, though, it's not going to be far from me. And let's talk a little bit about Mozi. So go ahead and refer, that was the was it a pitchfork? It's not a pitchfork, pickaxe. Go ahead and refer to your Mozi PowerPoint slides, which I provided. You see a nice picture of Mozi on the first slide there. Apparently he was a pretty good looking guy. You know, I don't know. It's not a photograph as far as I'm told, but you know, my sources may be wrong. It may actually be an actual photograph. So Mozi talked a little about him in lecture already, but just to kind of fill in maybe some of the blank spaces for you all. So he's born, you know, again, this is all roughly around 470 BCE and dies around 391 BCE. If you look at your second slide, you'll see that Master Mo actually has some uptake even in contemporary culture. This is an example, probably not so much in mainstream Canadian culture, obviously, but this Legend of Qin, which was a popular anime in China a few years ago, Mo and his followers are kind of prominent as part of the story. So it shows that, you know, even today, someone from, you know, now almost 2,500 years ago, you know, actually his ideas, which were never kind of the dominant ideas in kind of classical Chinese culture, and then even through the imperial phase, nevertheless, they have still remained important, and people today are still talking about them and putting them into popular fiction. Third slide, you'll see there's a map of the Warring States period, which is taking place. It begins a little bit before Mozi begins his, well, before he's born, and certainly before he begins his kind of career as a thinker and philosopher. But this period is a time of strife, very much like the times that we are dealing with a little later in ancient Greece. The Peloponnesian War, where all of the various Greek city-states are engaged in some way in conflict, although that's a shorter period. But this Warring States period is a period where various states in what comes to be known as China are jockeying for power. There is a period of stabilization that occurs with the founding of the first real empire, which comes a little bit after 221 BCE. But really, most of the thinkers that we're going to be dealing with from classical China come from this period of strife and turmoil. So the question was raised in my seminar about whether Mo was coming from a period, whether Mo was just a kind of reflection of his time, and that his time was relatively more peaceful than, let's say, Homer's time. And in fact, it's a reasonable question, but in fact, it doesn't seem to be the case. So Mo's yearning, Master Mo's yearning for, you know, for an era when there will be a kind of universal harmony, is birthed by the exact opposite that he sees going on in the world around him. So he comes from a world of warfare, and he yearns for something else. So looking to your next slides. Sorry, I'm going to adjust my view there for a bit. So, you know, he was a blue collar, what we might call a blue collar kind of guy. He was a carpenter. You can also put in mind Socrates was a stonemason. So there's a tradition, you know, across cultures of philosophers, you know, who are really working with their hands and get their start that way. But he's known as a very crafty person, a person with a lot of technical knowledge. He's an inventor, and he becomes an expert in siege warfare. This is relevant for that anime that I was telling you about. This is one of the things that his followers are known for in that series. So he is known as an opponent of the followers of Confucius and Lao Tzu, who are respectively the founders of Confucianism, or what we come to know as Confucianism, and Taoism. So Mozi is very much kind of outside the mainstream. At least he views himself as outside the mainstream, and his followers are seen as outside the mainstream of Confucian belief, which becomes the predominant system of philosophy and culture in China. So as we will be seeing shortly in lecture when I'm talking about Mengzi, or Mencius, who is a follower of Confucius, or Kongzi, Mozi opposes the family basis of the Confucian system and the obedience to ritual. Those are twin pillars. The idea of the family as the central unit, and all other moral relations sort of are based on a kind of family structure or an analogy with the family in Confucian systems. Mo says that is these two things, family and ritual, are exactly the wrong ways of going about building a moral and civic order. Now, he does yearn for a kind of king who is going to take up his principles, that is Mozi's principles, and rule in the interests of everyone. Now, of course, in the Confucian system, there is still an ideal of a king or ruler who will look out for everyone, but it is on the analogy of a parent or a father who is looking out for children. Mozi says that is not the kind of mindset or mentality or analogy, the family, that a ruler should be basing his or her rulership on. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, which is entitled Impartial Caring, or Universal Love, his key concept, Mozi's key concept, is translated in our text as impartial care or impartial caring. In earlier texts, when it was being translated into English, it was known as universal love. So you can think of either one of those if it helps you to kind of get into Mozi's mindset. So what does Mozi argue? Mozi argues that the main problem with the world today, again, this is a world beset by strife and warfare between these various states that are jockeying for power over, hegemony over what will become China. The main problem is bias. Maybe you've heard of bias. Maybe you've heard people talking about bias or criticizing others. People never criticize themselves for this. Criticizing others for being too ideological. Well, this is very much Mo's view, Master Mo's view, is that almost all people are too biased on behalf of what is their own. It can be their own self, it can be a kind of real selfishness, or their own family, or their own state. So Mozi doesn't care and doesn't think you're a selfless person if you give up kind of yourself on behalf of your family or your state, because that is still a partial or biased preference. You're still biasing what is your own. It's just you've now extended it from yourself to the family or the state. It's still bias. It's still partiality. So partiality or partisanship is the crucial problem. People constantly mistake the general interest they constantly mistake what is actually their own interest for the general interest, and they're only really concerned, most people, Mo thinks it's possible to get outside of that bias, but most people focus just on their own family, their own state. You hear that? Could be zombies above using a sink. I'll have to check on that. Don't worry if you're worried that I won't have the room to fight them off in here with my pickaxe. I've got other weapons, so I'm ready. So just don't worry about that. Don't worry about me. Take care of yourselves, but not in a partial way. Let's think about Mozi in this instance. So impartial care is the solution Mo proposes as a concept. Rulers should be guided by this. Individuals should be guided by it. Parents and children should be guided by this ideal. So care for others as you would care for anyone. Don't think, oh, it's just because I want someone to treat my parents like their own parents. That's not the way of going about it. So if Mo says, if you want someone to care for your parents, which is a very important ideal in the Confucian system of thought, again, because the family is kind of the primary locus of meaning and morality, and the primary analogy for understanding morality for Confucius. Mo says, care for others' parents first, right? So he says, if you want your parents cared for, the best way to do this, just in a practical way, so he's proposing this as a kind of practical solution, is show people, be a model for people, and care for their parents just as you would care for yours. That's the way for other people to understand this and for them to see that it's possible, and then for that kind of system to take hold. Critics say this is impossible. This is too idealistic. Human beings are not capable of this. By the way, we see the same criticisms leveled against the kind of Moist position in contemporary debates. So there are contemporary debates. I don't have this on the slide, but just to kind of to contextualize this, there are contemporary debates between what is called cosmopolitanism, that is thinking everyone is a kind of equal citizen of the world, regardless of what place they come from, or kind of patriotism or nationalism, the idea that we should care, we can maybe care for those outside of our country, but we need to care for those within our country first, and then kind of to a lesser degree, we can extend that care outside of our national boundaries. The claim of the patriots today is the same as the claim of the Confucians back then. Mo, what you're asking for is impossible. You can't ask for people to actually give up caring for their own in favor of caring for others outside of their group. Mozi says, actually, in fact, there are very concrete examples of this. The concrete example is when a soldier has to go away to fight, and people, this is the Warring States period, people are being called up to fight, sons are constantly being forced to leave their families to go to war. So leave their parents, or, you know, if they have a family of their own, they're leaving, you know, their wife, their children. They're constantly doing that in favor of this abstract ideal. They think that their state is their state, so that's why they're going to do it. But they're actually giving up what is their own and what is closest to them. They're going to rely on other people to take care of their families while they're away at war, and many of them will actually die in this service. So there is a basic kind of selflessness. It's just, Mozi says people don't actually recognize this. So people are already doing this thing that the patriots, the nationalists, the Confucians claim is kind of impossible. This idea of kind of giving over or being willing to view the world in somewhat more impartial terms. As I say, Mozi still says that the way they're doing it is in a kind of biased way because it's their own state that they're doing it for. But the point for Mozi is they are giving up what is most concretely theirs and their own kind of self-interests in favor of this abstract and kind of semi-impartial ideal. Okay, next slide, which is entitled Warfare, and we're getting close to the end of this little mini lecture. This is really good because, again, I'm trying not to make too much noise. I'm afraid the zombies are going to hear me. So what does Mo say about warfare specifically? So it follows on his idea of impartial care. Why do wars occur? Wars occur basically because of bias. They occur because rulers are biased in favor of their own treasury, excuse me, their own, you know, tax base, their own tax revenue, their own territory, their own wealth. And because of that, that is why they start wars. Mo says, if we are willing to condemn individuals who rob and who murder, if we say that is one of the most fundamental things that is wrong in the world, and Confucians do say that, Mo says, how are we not saying that warfare is absolutely the worst thing? Just because you are doing this on behalf of a state doesn't change the fact that it is murder and it is robbery. And it is done on the basis of partiality and bias, not on the basis of impartiality or love. So individuals and rulers both ought to base their desires on what they need. Most people are instead focused on luxuries. They don't actually recognize what they need, and therefore they begin wars or go to war on behalf of completely superfluous things that are not genuine needs, and commit robbery and murder, mass robbery on the basis of those. So ask yourself, and a number of you have already raised these issues in seminar and in your forum post, ask yourself how Mozi is going to be looking at Homer. Is what we see of warfare and partiality, the criticisms of those things in Mozi, do we actually see examples of this? Is Homer a template of how to live wrongly, right? That's certainly one way of viewing Homer. Another way of viewing Homer would be, of course, if you're viewing Homer slightly more ironically, or thinking that there's something else going on kind of behind the scenes in a way, is that maybe Homer is more on side with Mozi than we might otherwise think. So, you know, ask yourself these questions as you're dodging zombies in the streets and thinking about the Iliad. Okay, so that concludes this mini lecture on Mozi. I hope you all stay safe. I'm gonna go upstairs, and you know, we'll see. Hopefully you see me in lecture later. If you don't, I guess you know what happened. So take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Impartiality, universal love rules the day. Peace.